Welcome to this video on Redux. Redux is a state management library. It's often used in large applications to ensure that state changes are consistent across the entire application. So often Redux, it's used with a front-end framework such as React. However, in this broad overview, we'll use Redux with TypeScript. So we'll understand how to configure it with TypeScript, and we'll also ascertain whether or not we should implement Redux into our own projects. So in a previous video, I configured a simple TypeScript starting point using Webpack. So I'll link that in the video, just below the YouTube video, and I'll also provide a GitHub repository so you can just download that if you wish. So, okay, so what is Redux? Redux, it can be described in three fundamental principles. So there's the single source of truth, which is a global state of the entire application. So the state, all the variables of the entire application, it's stored in an object tree, in a single store. The second fundamental principle is that state is read-only. So you may hear the term that state is immutable, and the only way we can change the state is to emit an action, which is an object describing what happened, and we'll get into that in a moment. And changes are made with pure functions, and we'll get into that a little bit later as well. And these changes with pure functions are to specify how the state tree is transformed by actions. So you write pure reducers. And Redux, it was inspired by the Flux architectural design pattern. And in a nutshell, basically what we'll achieve with our Redux Flux pattern is let's think of an example. So let's say we click on a button from the user interface. After we click a button, an action is dispatched, and that action, it goes to a reducer. And a reducer, it takes the current state and action, and it will create a new state. The store then will return the new state to our UI. So that's in a nutshell what we're going to do with Redux here, and we're going to implement it with TypeScript. So let's just go ahead and get into the actual coding of this. So first things first, we're going to need to install Redux. So we'll just do an npm install Redux. And okay, what this should do for us in our package.json file is it will add it as a dependency, and we can see that we've got version 4.0.5. The next thing we want to do is we want to open up our index.html, and we want to create a few little buttons here. So let's just say, and in our Redux application we'll just have an add and a minus button. So we'll have something that displays that. So we'll just have we'll make the button first. So we'll make a button with the ID of add, and this will be an add button. And then we'll go ahead and we'll shift up down that, and we will make a minus button. And this can also be minus here too. And we want to display a value, and we can do this in a span here, and we'll give this span an ID of count or counter, and just in Redux when we're applying our state. So let's say initially it's 0 or 1 or 2, is we don't write this in the HTML, we write this in the Redux, in the reducer. So now that we've got our setup here, what we can do is recall that in a previous video in our package.json file we've set up this Webpack script, so we can do an npm run dev, and this will just watch our changes, our TypeScript files, and it will build those for us. So we can look at it, the HTML file which is referencing this bundled script, and we can open this up in live server. So let's do that. And okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll make this full screen over here. And if we just do an F12, we can open up the developer tools, and we can see that we've got this index.ts and temp.ts. These console log messages, they're just coming from the Webpack TypeScript that we've configured previously. So we can go ahead and we can now delete this temporary file here. And to start off with, we'll just do this in one file and we'll later restructure it. But we'll go ahead and we'll just delete everything and we'll just save that. And now if we return to our HTML page, we've got a nice clean slate where we just got this add and minus buttons. And they obviously don't do anything just yet. We'll just set that up in a moment. But so what we want to do is, since we have these buttons, we want to be able to emit an action. So what we can do is we can make our actions in the TypeScript file. So let's just go here and we'll just say actions, and you know, we can just use a document.getElementById, and we'll get the ID add, and we can add an event listener here, and we can wait for a click, and this should be a bang sign here. So the bang sign just is in TypeScript just to ensure that it's not null. So this might, you know, this might not always have a value, or this might not always be a DOM element, but since we know explicitly that it is, we can tell TypeScript that is with this bang operator here. So we can add an event listener, and we can listen for a click event, and on a click event we can call back another function, and what we'll do here is this is where we'll dispatch an action. So to dispatch an action, we dispatch an action to the store. So we're going to do something, and we need to import the store. So we need to create a store, and we got the store from Redux, we just need to import it. So we can import create store, and this is from Redux. So now in this document get element by ID add, we can add a store dot, we need to create a store first, and I might just leave these actions here until we create the store. So I'll go ahead and create the second one here, and this will just be a minus. So now we can go ahead and we can make the store, and the store, I don't know why I did that, but the store holds our entire application state. Our actions will get dispatched to the store, and then it will further get sent to a reducer. So to create a store, we can just make a constant store, and that'll be equal to this create store. Now notice there's an error here. That's because we need to pass in a reducer to the store, but we don't have a reducer yet. So let's go ahead and we'll make a reducer. And a reducer, it's a big switch statement. And what it does is it copies the existing state, it makes a modification to the new object depending on what action you pass to it, and then it returns a new state to be displayed in the user interface. So it's a pure function, meaning for any argument it will always return the same result without any side effects. So for example, if you have an add function with the arguments x and y, it doesn't matter how many times you call it or what time you call it at, it will always return the same x plus y. Whereas an impure function, that could be something where it calls another function that's also impure, or you know, you could call this method where you get the current time, for example, and that's going to change each time. Or if you manipulate the DOM in a certain way. These are all examples of impure functions, but we want to use pure functions. So in our reducer, we can go ahead and we can create it, and we can create it by coming up with a constant variable, and we'll call this operation, because we'll just do plus and minus. We'll increment by 1 or decrement it by 1, and what this will do is this will be our big switch statement inside, but it should be noted that a reducer, it takes a state, whatever the state is, and it also takes an action. And because we're in TypeScript here, just for now, I'll just give this an any type for the action. And for the state, now the state is the global state that will be in the store, but in the first instance we don't have one, so we can sort of initialize it here, and we'll just say that the count will be equal to 0. And okay, and we'll add the TypeScript later on, but for now let's just add our switch statement. So we can add a switch statement here like this, and one thing to note is the state, it's immutable, so we don't mutate the state like with a push method or an object dot syntax. We actually need to create the new state, so we can do that, and we can make this constant variable here for the next state. And what we'll do is we'll set this to whatever the current state is. Oh, and this needs to be an arrow function, by the way. And so the next state will, so the state in this case is just the count. It's just an object with the count. So we can take that count and we can assign it to the state.count. And this is now a new object. So what we can do is for the our switch statement is for the action type. So we haven't actually sent off our action yet, but we will in a moment. And okay, so for the action dot type, and this will all come together. It's just all these new concepts. Initial concepts that sort of all work together, so you got to sort of choose one area to think of and explain first before it all sort of comes together, and you'll see how it all comes together. Okay, so what I might do now, since I've got this reducer, it's not fully made yet, but we can just pass that into the store, and okay. It's used before. Oh, okay, yeah, right. So you need to make sure that the store that uses the reducer comes after the reducer, like that. Now, no overload matches, overload 1 and 2. We'll just ignore this just for now. We'll come back to it. And in fact, this is alright. Okay, so the action type. So we're going to have two different cases here. The first case will be that we have an add action, and the second case will be, and I might just bring this down one, that we have a minus action. And it should be noted that these actions is a best practice to have a uppercase letters here. So, okay, so what are these actions? So we can, when we fire off an event, we have a click event, and we click on a button in our user interface. We can click an add button or a minus button, and what we can do is we can dispatch an action by using this dispatch method. And the dispatch method, it takes an action. And this is, the action is just an object, and it has a type, and they always have a type. And we can pass in this add type here. So you should start to see that, you know, from the UI we dispatch an action of the type add, and this is on the store, so it comes to the store, and the store sort of connects the action to the reducer. So you dispatch an action, and we'll listen out for this later on, and so whenever that's called, it will go to the operation reducer. So it goes to our reducer, you know, if the state isn't initially there, like in the first instance, it will set that state for us, otherwise there will be a global state in the store, and you know, there'll also be the action type that we're passing in. So we type in this add type here, so it takes the case of the action, and then we're going to do something for that particular case, and it's a pure function, so we're creating a new object rather than, you know, changing the other object. And it should be noted that we could also optionally, and we'll do this later on, add more values here, like a payload with other data, like if we're doing a post request or something like that. And we'll get into asynchronous stuff later on as well with Redux stuff. But let's just start here. So we can go ahead and we can just copy this dispatch method, and we can copy it down over here, and this will be for the minus case. So we can start it to see how it's coming together now. So let's handle the actual cases. So in the case that we're in an add type for the action, all we want to do is we want to get the new object, which is just a clone of the previous state. So for the next state, and now we can modify the object because it's a different object, and this will just be equal to whatever the state count is. So the next state dot count will be whatever the state dot count is plus 1. And rather than breaking here, we'll just return, and they'll return out of the switch block. So we can return the next state, and we can go ahead and we can copy this for the minus case as well. And we can just change this here to a -1, and we can default just by returning whatever the state was. Okay, so this is our reducer, and only the reason why we're creating this new state rather than modifying it, so there's only like one real way to compare two objects to see if there's a difference in the state, and that's with a deep compare. And this is a very expensive operation computationally, especially as the application grows. So that's why it's better in the state management methods to use this creation of a new object whenever there's a change to our application, and then rather than returning the existing object. So okay, so now that we've got our reducer, all we have to do is we just have to display in this counter what the count is, noting that it initially is 0. And we can do this by, well, we can just get the ID of that counter element with a document .get element by ID, and that's the counter. And I'll just add this bang here because it won't be null. And what we can do is, for our store to recognize a change, we need to subscribe to it. So what we can do here is we can say store.subscribe render. So when you click a button, for the TypeScript or JavaScript code to be able to detect if you click the button or not. So we got the we're handling dispatching the action, which is dispatching it to the store. So whenever there's a change in the store, we can detect that by subscribing to the store. But we need to pass in a function here, and we got to pass in this render function, and we create that ourselves. So let's just create this constant arrow function render, and this will be equal to the arrow object. This render arrow function. This will just have the state. So to get the state, and we'll store this in a variable state, that's on the store. So we can access the store and we can get that state. And then for that counter element that we created, we can change the inner HTML, and this will be equal to whatever the state is and the count of the state, and this will need to be converted to a string because it's currently a number, so let's just convert that into a string. Okay, so that's that render. Let's see here, const state, cannot find name state. Okay, I just forgot the arrow on the arrow function there. And okay, we get the state, and we change the count to a string, and we subscribe to that. So, okay, so if we add something, we get 1. If we minus something, we get 0. And I might just put that on a new line. You know, make it a little bigger maybe. So let's see, I'll put this on a break here. And I'll just give it an inline style of, let's see here. So font size equals 24 pixels, let's say. And notice that's not there initially. And then if we add it, then it is there. So that means we need to, well, essentially the render function gets called whenever the store detects a change, but initially there is no change. So we can just call the render function essentially for the first case. And what that will do is they'll display the 0 there, and it's getting the initial state, which we've passed into the reducer here. And that's what's being displayed. So then if we click add here, they'll add, and if we minus, they'll minus. So in a nutshell, just to recap Redux, what we've done is we have 2 buttons, add and minus, in our user interface. We want to make a change to that state, and that state can be changed in 2 different ways, and in a larger application there'll be many ways to change it, and it'll be displayed in multiple sections, which is sort of why we use Redux. These actions, these user interface DOM elements, they dispatch an action when you click on them from an event, and these events it will dispatch the action to the store, and the action will be of a particular type that we create in uppercase, and this goes to the store. So if we dispatch the add action to the store by clicking the add button, we've got our store, we created our store, and our store then takes in a reducer, and that's how we connect our actions to the reducer through the store. And our reducer, it has an initial state, and it returns a new state, and depending on what the action we pass into it. So because it's a pure function, we make a new object next state, and we have this massive switch statement. Well, it's not massive here, but we have this switch statement here, and it takes the action type, and for the case add, we can add 1 to the new state, and we can return that state, and then that state is now returned into the store, and that state is just essentially count 1 or whatever the count will be after we click a few buttons. And if neither of those occur, we can just return the default state, which is what happens in the case we call the initial render function here, which it gets the state, which is a method built into the Redux store, and we sort of add the inner HTML to that element that we specified in our span for our counter. And we call this render function, but there's nothing passed into it, so it just takes the initial state and returns that. So, and yeah, we're subscribed to that store, so we can, for whatever changes occur to the store, so meaning when the state changes and that's changed through an action, we can sort of render that in the places we wish to render it. So that's an introduction to Redux. Now I know we didn't go into TypeScript just yet, only touched on it a little bit, but in the next video I want to structure this single file into multiple files, and I also want to add some types. So let's go ahead and we'll do that in the next video. Thanks so much for watching.